I remember what she said to me, and it's something that has stuck with me my entire life. She pulled me aside one day and told me, it was my sophomore year of high school, and she's like, "You should stage manage our shows because you have a way of making people listen to you without yelling." And at the time, I was 14 and didn't really understand what that meant. And I was more so like, I get to be in charge, sign me up.
Hi, my name is Megan Jensen, and I'm the Director of Programs for the American Theater Wing, and I'd like to welcome you to the Network for Emerging Leaders in the Theater. The network bridges information and access for emerging theater leaders by providing conversations, insight, connections, and networking opportunities for young professionals interning and working in theater administration roles, both artistic and executive. You can support the American Theater Wing and help us continue to provide free resources like this conversation today to the next generation of arts workers. There is no donation too small.
Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'm so thrilled for this conversation that we're going to be having on stage management. A big welcome to all of our attendees and panelists from across the country and globe. I have the ultimate pleasure of introducing our moderator for tonight's conversation. David Mendizabal is a director, producer, designer, and one of the producing artistic leaders of the Obie Award-winning The Movement Theater Company. He is also the Associate Artistic Director of the Soul Project and a member of the inaugural Soho Rep Project 1 residency and Ars Nova Vision residency. David attended NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and has directed and developed work with companies including the Public, Atlantic Theater Company, Long Wharf, and many, many others. And one of my favorite facts about David, which I haven't even told him, is that he started off as a costume designer. He's an incredible leader in our field. We are so thrilled that he's going to join us in this conversation today. So David, come and join us. How you doing?
Hi, Megan. Thank you. I'm doing well, enjoying, so happy to be here and to have this, be helping to moderate this conversation.
Great. Well, we have an incredible group of panelists, so I'll kick it over to you and let us jump right in.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Thank you to all who are watching. This is going to be a really exciting conversation with 4 just rock star stage managers who I believe are stage managers are the heart and soul of the entire collaborative field of theater. So without further ado, let's welcome some of our panelists. So first up, we have, I feel like it's a game show and I'm welcoming folks. Come on down. First up, we have Cody Renard Richard. Cody is an advocate, an educator, and a professional stage manager. Yes, with a career that spans Broadway, television, Cirque du Soleil, opera, and so much more. He's worked on Broadway on 12 productions and has most recently served as the production stage manager for Freestyle Love Supreme, which we just found out is coming back this fall. So congratulations. He is an adjunct faculty at New York University, Columbia, and Fordham. Cody is a star. He's been featured in Variety magazine as one of their 2020 players to watch, Out Magazine's 2020 Out 100 honoree, and also featured in Forbes. This past year, you launched the Cody Renard Richard Scholarship Program in partnership with Broadway Advocacy Coalition, which is incredible, and I want to know more. And you hold a BFA in stage management from Webster. So yay, welcome, Cody. Next up to the game show, we've got Cherie B. Tay. They are a Broadway stage manager, a voice actor, and a multimedia creative artist. Cherie is currently the stage manager on the Tony Award and Grammy-winning Broadway production of Hadestown. They're joining us from Korea, where they are getting ready to put the show up there. They've been stage managing theater, dance, award shows, and live events for over a decade. And in addition to stage managing and voice acting, fun fact, Cherie is a videographer and a ukulele teacher. And their photography has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Vulture, Forbes, and more. So hi, Cherie, welcome. Our third guest our third panelist is Camera A. Jacobs. And Camera is dedicated and has been working towards creating opportunities for BIPOC stage managers. Yes. Credits include American Son on Broadway and the film version on Netflix, and Children of a Lesser God. We've also stage managed the first national tour of August Wilson's Jitney, Shadowland at the Public, and Much Ado About Nothing. internationally. You've worked The Bitter Game at Dublin Theatre Festival and Last Tiger in Haiti regionally, and on the Apple TV 12 Angry Men, an education MFA from UC San Diego. So welcome, Camera. Hi. And our last but definitely not least panelist is Rachel Sterner. Rachel is a graduate from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, currently resides in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Brooklyn. Career highlights include Harry Potter and the Cursed Child on Broadway, Cirque du Soleil's Paramour, working at Paper Mill Playhouse on The Honeymooners, and the international tours of Dralion and Michael Jackson, the Immortal World Tour, both with Cirque du Soleil, and Bette Midler's Divine Intervention, which is really cool because who doesn't want to work with Bette Midler? As well as How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Go Diego Go, Thomas the Tank, and Velvet at Edinburgh Fringe. So welcome, Rachel. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited because I love stage managers. Like I said, I think that you are the heart and soul of the collaborative process of the American theater, of what we all do. And you know, I'm really excited that we're getting to shed some light on your work and hopefully bring more folks, more young folks into this field. So, you know, one question that to kick us off is, you know, it's a big one, but I wonder, you know, how we can sort of hear the abridged version of what was your path to career that brought you to stage management? Did you know you wanted to be a stage manager? Did you transition from another part in the theater? Like, how did you find yourself saying, like, I want to be a stage manager and entering into this path?
I don't know about anybody else, but I think I've kind of found this is a common theme with stage managers, I think. I didn't know I wanted to be a stage manager until someone told me that I should maybe look into it. I grew up learning, I had this like a little tiny summer stock theater in this very small town in Pennsylvania where I grew up, which is so lucky for the rest of my life, as it turns out. But I knew how to like hang lights and run a follow spot. I was an usher. I kind of did all of that stuff that you do when you're at like a camp-like theater. And so I was very lucky, and I got to go to NYU for my undergrad, and I was going there as a lighting designer. And fortunately, by the end of my freshman year, I had teachers who knew a lot more than I did and recognized something in me, not only that maybe I had what it took to be a stage manager, but that I definitely didn't have what it took to be a lighting designer. And so at the end of my freshman year, they were like, why don't you try this? And I remember like begrudgingly being like, fine, I'll try this. I have a credit to fill. And I've been doing this ever since. I've been super lucky to just kind of keep getting gigs with it. And I think you kind of have to check in every day and be like, do I still want to stage manage? Yes, I do. But yeah, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of found me. I feel very fortunate for that.
I love that. Yeah. Someone identifying something and saying, I see something in you that you don't know yet. Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Yes. What else? What are some other?
Yeah, very similar to Rachel, to Sterner, if you will. In high school, my high school theater teacher saw something in me and kind of told me to stage manage. I remember what she said to me, and it's something that has stuck with me my entire life. She pulled me aside one day and told me, this was my sophomore year of high school, and she's like, you should stage manage our shows because you have a way of making people listen to you without yelling. And at the time, I was 14 and didn't really understand what that meant. And I was more so like, I get to be in charge, sign me up. And that kind of started it for me. I stage managed almost every show since then. And I really fell in love with the responsibility of it. I think as kids, when you get the responsibility of people needing stuff from you and just making you feel seen and important, that was very invaluable for me. So that's kind of how it started. And then they, showed me that I could do it in college. I had no idea that it could be a career. I was just like, I'm going to go do this in college and then figure it out. So they really were big champions of me doing it. And that's kind of how it started.
I was acting in undergrad, and when I graduated, I realized that I didn't want to audition because I'm sensitive and people saying no to me because of my person is too much. But so I went, and I also had a summer stock theater in Sacramento near where I grew up. And I went into an internship and was like, I want to try anything, but I don't want to try stage management. I'm not interested, but thank you so much. And so they put me in sound, and it was like a small show, and they were like, that's really cute. We need you over at stage management. And I just kind of fell in love with it from there.
I love it. You were like, not that. And then actually that was the thing that turned out to be where you wanted to be. Yeah. Cherie?
I actually almost have the same path as Cody. So I grew up in Singapore where like there wasn't a lot of arts. And then when I came to the US, in ninth grade, someone was like, you want to pull curtains? I was like, I'm sorry, what? um, and so I did that. I did the fall play, pulling the main rag, and then I just fell into stage management for the rest of my high school career and then ended up doing it in college and on and on and on.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I love that, Sterner, you were like, this is one of the things that I think is a common thing, is that someone recognizes something in you. And I'm curious, like, what do you think that is? Like, what is that thing that, because like stage managers are like incredibly just special. You're like, yes, you're amazing, and what do you think is that thing that someone saw in you? And as now you are industry leaders, what is that thing that you look for when you look at young industry professionals who maybe don't know about stage management or don't know that this is an opportunity? And you're like, that's the thing that really is gonna help you in this field.
Well, I think obviously if you look at all of us, it's charm first and foremost.
I'll be.
I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that everybody's probably going to have a different answer to this question, because like there's not really that one thing that makes a good stage manager. And I'm guessing we're all probably very different types of stage managers. I think for me, it was like well, actually that's a lie. I think a through line is probably like, you don't panic. You're not somebody that goes there. But I think there's different, like I know I look for a sense of humor. Like it's so indicative of so many things, I think. And just for me, I think it's like my ability to talk to people. It's like that is sort of the paperwork for me is something that has kind of like grown with me. But yeah, it's that person to person thing that I also love about the job. It's my favorite part.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you said, it is charm. There's a kind of, you interface with everyone on the production, like you really do. And so I love that idea of like how someone can connect to people on a real relational level. Yeah. What else? What are some other things that y'all are looking for or you think were found in you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very interesting because I feel like as humans and as artists, all we ever want is to be seen. So I think that, when you see something in someone, it's so important to say, oh my God, you're really good at this, look into this. And I think that when I look at younger people or even people who just want to be in the arts, for me, I gravitate towards people who want to be leaders, people who want to, use themselves to affect their work. And because as Rachel was saying, as Sterner was saying, for me, it's mostly about the people management and stage managing. I mean, anyone can learn how to call a show. Anyone can learn how to use an Excel document. Anyone can learn how to do all of those things. They may not be able to do it well, but there's a template to figure that out. So you can figure that out. It's the day-to-day learning how to motivate people, knowing how to mediate certain situations, knowing how to effectively lead without being, negative, you know what I mean? So I look for people like that, people who understand the social skills. I think that for me is way more important than any of the technical stuff that goes into stage managing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm on the same page with both Sterner and Cody. It's the social skills. It's also the energy. I always love like watching young stage managers like check the temperature of the room. I think like that's amazing because you will have some people that like, oh, things just got a little off there and are really oblivious to the fact that like, oh, the temperature just changed in the room. You need to shift a little as the stage manager. So I love meeting young stage managers who kind of inherently have that.
Yeah, agreed with all of the above. I did some help at LaGuardia High School with like young high school stage managers, and you can always tell who's like the calm one, who understands how to like it's the person that everyone gravitates to when they are in need of something. They're like, hey, and they know that this person will be like, what do you mean that isn't? It's like very like cool, like we'll get it figured out. Like there's this sort of calmness to it, and it's also someone you could probably sit in a room 17 hours with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that's key for many collaborators, but especially for stage managers who are there before and get there before everyone and stay after everyone. I think we've talked, you've all mentioned some of the things that stage managers do. There's calling shows, there's the paperwork, there's leading folks, there's interfacing with others. I'm curious, what are the things that as you've navigated your career, you've learned that fall into the lap of a stage manager that you didn't know? Like, what are the things that stage managers do that we don't know about?
I have a great answer. Getting
Yeah.
all the mail from the stage door and putting it into everyone's mailboxes. And then, like, not only that mail, the mail where people are like, I want a playbill. And then you have to, like, get everyone to sign it. Like, Broadway baseball, Broadway bowling, physical therapy sign up sheets, putting 400 posters into Broadway Cares bags every like 2 times a year. They don't teach that in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, because none of that has to do with the show. That has to do with all the extra stuff. So it's always like, oh, we have to do that too.
I think like along that, I go with the people again. I think a lot of times schools teach like the technical aspect and not necessarily like communication skills. And like, I know like I've been in a room like an early PSM in my career and like an issue was happening. And I was so used to being at ASM, I was getting ready to leave the room. And I was like, oh no, I'm a part of this conversation. Like I have to be there. So really being able to like mediate in a way where people don't feel like, oh, I'm on this side or I'm on that side. Like I'm Switzerland and I'm here to listen. Like, let's have a conversation.
Yes.
We had twice in about the span of 6 months, the sewage backup and start to flood our dressing rooms like within half hour. We were super hands on deck for that, unfortunately. And on a related note, we're always the one, I don't know, it's like, I don't know about you guys, but like probably 3 times a week, somebody pops their head into our office and it's like, we're out of toilet paper. I'm like, okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that. I love Cody. You're like, there's all of the work that goes into the show and into maintaining the show. And I think what's so important that we're really hearing is that it's so much about the people though. Like the show is made up of all the people and how you maintain that balance and that harmony amongst all of the collaborators on a piece, especially after a piece has been running for such a long time, And I love, Cherie, what you were saying. It reminds me of almost like a cruise ship director, all those like fun things that you get to do and not in a diminishing way, but in a really lovely way, like keeping that morale, keeping that energy and that spirit of the show and the company that was built. And I think that leads me to another question, which is, I believe that one of the most important roles of the stage manager is protecting the artistic integrity of the show, and I know, Cody, you said anyone could call a show, and yes, I think they could, but it takes a real special relationship, I think, between a stage manager and a show to keep that heartbeat, to keep that integrity. And I'm curious, like, how do you all do that? Like, what are the skills that are important for you throughout the process that help you fulfill that part of the job, maintaining the artistic integrity of a show?
Well, I mean, anyone can call a show, but not everyone can call it well.
Yeah.
You think that, calling a show is like a dance. And that's why I always tell people that I'm an artist. Some people don't agree that stage managers are artists, but I absolutely believe that we are, especially if you're working on a musical, or for instance, like my work with Freestyle Love Supreme, just the way that show breathes and how we have to work with the artists to make sure that the show happens in a certain rhythm. So I just want to just say that everyone can call a show, but everyone can't necessarily do it in the way that some stage managers can, which is why I say that we're artists. In terms of, maintaining the show, for me, I think, because we're with the show from the beginning, we are with the director while they're having these initial conversations, while some of them are doing table work. We're even around sometimes, months before while they're doing all this research. So we're really downloading all of this information all the time because we're hearing it over and over and over. And a lot of times we have to do understudy rehearsals. So we're regurgitating this all the time. So anyone other than the director and the person who's playing that part, we're the only other person who has lived what the world is supposed to be. And we see it from a different point of view. So I think that we are so equipped to upkeep the show because, directors will have their biases, even because this their vision and what they want. And an actor is going to have their, perceived whatever of what it is, but we are kind of that outside eye to be like, well, this is what he said and this is what you're doing, or this is what they said and this is what, you know what I mean? So I think that is just being able to step back and remember what was intended. I think that helps to when maintaining shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And that seems just like an incredible amount of listening from the beginning, just being present and really listening, not only to what's being said, but what's being communicated, which I think sometimes is more nuanced than just what's said, Yeah.
There's a lot of collaboration with the other departments in terms of notes as well, like stuff of, hey, this person isn't hitting their mark, therefore they're not in the light, which, so talking with every department and getting all of that together is also such a big, again, talking to people.
That's you took the words right out of my mouth. It's so much about talking to all of these departments and getting as much information as you can. And I think something that I have found as you you get out of high school and college where you start doing shows that run for longer than a weekend. I think the challenge really, like, it's anybody, we're going to throw this phrase around. Anybody can do this. Like, anybody can open a show, open a giant musical on Broadway and like have this fantastic thing that existed on opening night. Cause you're nervous and there's so much energy and the people and the energy from the crowd and all these things. And then everyone goes away, which frankly is my favorite time, is when everyone goes away and leaves us alone. And I think what separates good company members from like great company members are the people that can find that opening night performance on a Wednesday afternoon, on a Saturday night. Well, that was the wrong Saturday night. That was the one show. That's the most exciting time. But like a Tuesday night, whatever it is, and finding that through the boredom and through the monotony of doing that over and over again is a serious, that is a skill. That is a serious skill that not only has to exist on stage, but it has to exist for everybody else in the company. It has to exist for the crew, and it definitely has to exist for us. And being that rock that can keep our eye on what that is supposed to look like is a really, I think, a really challenging part of the job, because when you watch it over and over again, trying to find ways to keep your eyes fresh, it's difficult, but again, it's another challenge that I think can be really enjoyable.
Yeah.
I want to add to the cruise director thing you were talking about earlier, because it does get it's a job, at the end of the day, it is a job and we do love it. However, so for me, I was hired onto Hadestown. I was like, what are you looking for in your team? And Beverly was like, a cruise director. And I was like, great, I could do that. So stuff of like doing on 2-show Sundays, which we never have, doing like Nintendo 64 parties and onesies with like cereal, or just like random things to heighten the spirit, or having like a high five routine with your props guy, something that like shakes up the vibe, something that connects you to them, something that keeps it fresh and makes you want to be there. I feel like makes the show so much better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I agree with everyone. And I think, like, for myself, it's a lot of, like, as everyone said, just leaning into those relationships when I have to maintain a show, leaning into the relationship with the director. I know not all directors are like, you can call me whenever, but like ideally you have a director, because there are some moments where I've been like, I've watched the show like 100 times and a moment's not working and I don't understand why it's not working, but it's just not clicking the way it was when the director was there. And so being able to call the director and be like, listen, this is the moment that's happening. I'm not quite sure what's going on. And being able to have an open dialogue about like how we can shift and get back, because the idea is that the show of course evolves, right? But like, I'm never saying anything new to the actors or to the company that hasn't already been said before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating because it is really wild to think about that juxtaposition between, like you're saying, it is a job and it is most certainly artistry. Like it is such a creative art form in the sense of really the nuance of having to really how to perceive that, like what you're talking about, camera, how to perceive something's not working, how can I find what that is, and it's that weird thing about theater where you're like, we rehearse it so that it feels fresh, and I feel like stage managers really like keep it fresh, keep it fresh by keeping it sort of specific, and that perception, that artistry that really is in knowing something so much more than I think anyone is incredible. There are a lot of folks here who are joining us who are curious about how to start out in this field. I think so much that the expression that we hear is like, how do you get your foot in the door? What are those ways to network and to meet people? And what would you say is advice that you would give to some of the young artists who are here watching who have an interest in becoming stage managers? Where can they start?
Listen, the thing that I've been telling a lot of people lately is that when you make a connection, follow up. I can't tell you how many people that I have had lunch with, who I ran into on the street, who has never checked in with me about anything. And not to say that they have to continuously be checking in with me, but I think that it's about, it's out of sight, out of mind. You know what I mean? Like, there are times when I was expecting that, I'm gonna get a call for this thing, but I never followed up with that person. So they moved on to the person who did. So I think that it's really important. If you make a connection, follow up with them. Just say, hey, I'm around. I don't know if you have anything. And if they don't respond, do not take it personal. I used to, and it will save you a lot of sleep, a lot of heartache. So I just think that it's important to know that in order to keep connections, you have to stay on people's radar. So you have to figure out what that means in terms of how often you check in. But, we say this all the time, half of getting jobs is through connections. So I think it's really important to network and use that world in addition to all of the other routes that I'm sure these other folks are going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think something I was when I was little, I was like always very nervous. And email wasn't even like as prevalent as it is now. But I would get I don't want to bother anybody, It is zero effort for somebody on the other end to read an email. I swear you're like never bothering anybody. I went finally and like went around to Stage Doors and gave like Stage Doors my resume. Like that does not bother anybody. You're not getting in anybody's way to just get your name out there and say, hey, this is me. I would love to have a chat with you. Like Cody said, the worst thing that's going to happen is that they don't respond and you're going to get right over it because it's not that big of a deal. I also think kind of going parallel with like actually getting jobs in stage management is while you're on that path, whatever that path ends up being for you, don't say no to other opportunities. Like, especially if you're in a town and you're at a community theater or you're somewhere where you're not like a union stage manager where you have to do that, or they have unions or something. If someone's like, do you want to be a dresser for this show? Don't go into it thinking, no, I want to be a stage manager. I'm not going to be a dresser. There is literally no job in the theater that you can take that will not be relevant and make you a better stage manager by taking it. Like, I am so glad I used to know how to like mix a show. I can't mix a show like for real, but having that knowledge about everything that everybody does, even just a little bit, it's a night and day difference. It's going to make people want to keep working with you. It's going to make your relationships with everybody that you're working so much better.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that is the case for all artists, for directors, for stage managers, for designers, for actors. It's like the more you really understand what you don't have to master what everyone else does. Like, there's a reason someone else is focusing on that. But I think even with your story, you started off in lighting and like all of that. I'm sure as you're like in tech, having these conversations with a lighting designer, you just understand everyone's languages, you know what I mean? Their artistic languages. And so it just makes you a better artist. Absolutely. And to the first point, actually, just because, Jenny Gersten, who is a producer, an amazing producer who I love, she was a teacher of mine. She gave me one of the best pieces of advice that I tell my students all the time. And it's exactly what Cody, what you and Rachel were saying, which is you're not annoying, so don't be annoying, and you won't be annoying. And I was like, it blew my mind, and it was so simple, but I think it goes to what y'all are saying is like, yes, don't be annoying, because one can tiptoe into that, but it is an industry where you have to build those relationships, and it takes work. Those relationships takes work, they take effort. And I love, Rachel, what you said, it takes little effort to read or ignore an email. And there's lots of people out there working, so you have to find those folks and build those relationships. But yeah, I love that advice. I think that's great. And I'm curious, Cherie or Camera, if you have any other advice for young folks who are trying to get their foot in the door.
Yeah, there's so many resources out there now. There are books that you can read. There are groups that you can join on Facebook. There's like a stage manager group. We actually have our own BIPOC stage manager group as well. There's Year of the Stage Manager, which ran a whole campaign. There's stuff like this that you can look into, panels. Instagram for stage manager. There's YouTube accounts. Kent Collins is doing like an educational stage manager YouTube account. SM Network was how I started as like a high schooler, being like, I want to stage manage. Stuff of keeping in touch for sure, of like talking to one of us, like Cody and I are on Instagram. I don't know, I can't speak for Cody, but like people do reach out to me, and once in a while when I'm like awake at midnight in Korea, I'm like, hey, cool, so you want to get into stage management? And then same thing of what Rachel said, when you get a job that's not stage management, do that job and do it well. Do that job that you're hired to do, because people will remember. I got so many jobs from me being a music assistant, from me doing other things, and they're like, oh, she's a stage manager, or they could totally, like, you need a stage manager, call Cherie. And
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything everyone just said. That's how I met Cody. I was in school and I was like, hey, so like I'm a stage manager and I'm interested in coming to New York. And, I continued to keep in contact with Cody and continued to keep in contact with other people. For me, it was a lot of like looking for people who are doing the thing that I want to do, like the type of shows that I want to do. They're in the like space that I want to be in, and trying to connect with those people and continuing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a great question that just came into the chat, as we're talking about a lot of this self-educating of making those connections, finding out who's doing the work that you want to sort of connect with. Are there any specific books that you would recommend reading that are about stage management, or even like not about stage management, that you felt really helped you understand what your role was?
Can I just, I'm that like with like academic stage management textbooks, I'm not the person to ask about that, but there are so many good resources. But I will say, and at the risk of sounding like a super big loser, it is not a loser. I'm not a loser. The Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin is like, it's about like Lincoln's political career. Sounds great, right? But it's actually a really, really amazing book about like teamwork and like checking your ego. And there's actually like really great lessons in there about how to be a leader for a team, especially of people that are very eclectic personalities, which you will run into.
Yes.
One of my favorite books that I read, which isn't necessarily, I don't read a lot, just gonna put that out there, that isn't necessarily about stage managing, but it's about the theater, it's about the making of the musical Follies. It's Everything Was Possible by Ted Chapin.
Yes.
And he started as a stage manager here, he produced and all that stuff. And I think that it is such a great book that teaches you, shows you how things start from page to stage, essentially. And it's such an inspiring story, and I've read it a couple of times, so I love it that much. So I would check that one out as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say too, I'm not really a big like stage management book reader.
Yeah.
Like that's not my thing. But I did read Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and like it talks so much about vulnerability, and I don't think people often think that like vulnerability fits into your world as a stage manager, but it does. And like talks about how to, check your ego. And like, I learned so much about how to be like yep, that was me, that was my fault, like, and we can move on. But it just acknowledging it and like moving forward instead of like making excuses, just the accountability of it all. And then I do have to shout out Narda Alcorn and Lisa Porter's stage management theory book. I think that was a really amazing book and gave you like specific like experiences that they both had that I felt like was really, really helpful.
Yeah, love it.
That's the one I was going to shout out. And, you know, you got your classic educational Thomas A. Kelly, Peter Lawrence, Lawrence Stern and Jill Gold, Lori Kinkman, I think. Those are all standard college assigned textbooks.
Yeah, I love Camera. What you were saying though is with Narda's book, which I don't know, but I do know Narda, and I love her. Is so much of it is navigating those relationships, navigating those personalities. We've brought up personalities, you know, seeing that you all as stage managers interface with everyone. I'm sure you have a mixed bag of experiences with personalities. And I'm curious, like, how do you navigate those more sort of those moments of tension or those difficult conversations that might have to come up in a collaboration, which are inevitable? Conflict is inevitable when we put people together. How do you as a stage manager navigate that safely for everyone?
I don't know. I think that, you know, it's very situational. But I think for me, navigating situations and people, it's all about assessing what I'm witnessing, you know, like, and then speaking on the facts. I'm not always successful. I try not to speak from emotion or personal opinion. I try to speak on what I encountered or what was said to me, so everyone knows like this is what is being said, not what's being interpreted, and then we can go from there. I think once we start to infuse our own personal narratives, our own personal opinions, it muddies the water. Or when you start taking someone else's thing and then we're not necessarily dealing with the situation, we're adding on to something that's probably a little tense. And it's hard, you know, that's something that, you know, we all, I mean, speaking for myself, that I struggle with, and sometimes I thrive with it. It just depends on the situation, and it depends on who the person is or what the situation is that you're having to deal with. Some people don't want you to help and they just want to be mad and they want to, you know, spiral. And then so you have to provide space for that while that doesn't, you know, hurt or affect anyone else in the company. So I think that, you know, it's situational, but I think the biggest thing that we can do is remain calm and get all of the facts so we can report on whatever the situation is.
Yeah, it was like Camera, I think you said you're Switzerland, you know? Yeah.
And I think also being okay with yourself as a person and working on yourself as a person. You know, when things come up and there's something triggers your trauma from before, which did happen to me, and talking through that through with a therapist and being like, this is not personal, you know, again, maintaining Switzerland is so important of knowing who you are as a person before being able to really settle any arguments that come up.
Yeah. It's so interesting because stage managers have a lot of opinions and we want to say our opinions all the time. So so that's hard. That is hard to like sit back and be like, well, here we go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I will say like being Switzerland is not easy. I have my own opinions. And sometimes I'm like, wow, like this tension is wild. Like, I don't understand. And sometimes Camera as a person, agree with someone more than someone else. But as the stage manager, like I have to really think like what is best for the show, what is best. And what is best for the show doesn't just mean like getting the show up. It's like, what is best for the company? What is best for the group? I think that's so much of what we do. And for me, I think, Cherie, exactly what you said, knowing yourself. And I know that like conflict makes me uncomfortable. Sometimes like I feel it in my chest and like I have to reconnect to my breath and be like, it is okay. I am grounded here. Like these are things that I have to say to myself. So in the idea of knowing yourself, just like knowing what brings you back to that calm, because I love that everyone like talks about calm. And I feel like I am calm, or at least like that's what people see me as. And inside I might be like, oh my God, what is happening? So I think being able to like bring myself back to my own foundation is really important.
Yeah, I love that.
I want to add having a team that you can trust as well, of like being able to just get on the soapbox, lay it all out, and then be like, okay, you heard me. Thank you. Oh my God, that was nuts. And then move on.
Yeah.
And also in addition to that, sorry, I'm gonna let you go. But in addition to that, like how Cameron, you're just saying, sometimes conflict is hard to deal with. There is nothing wrong with going home and practicing what you would say in a certain situation. I've written out things that I need to say to someone in order to talk about a disciplinary action. You know what I mean? So I think that it's important to write your words out or just practice them out loud, just so you feel comfortable when you're approaching the people in these situations. Some people aren't great with just talking off of the cuff. So I think that if you are like that, then use some of these other public speaking tools that will help you succeed when you step into these moments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have had so many conversations with people in the shower all the time. I'm like, listen.
A good place to collect your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And you sound great. So Cody said something earlier about like in just absolutely 110% with what everybody has just said. But I think sometimes it helps me to think about things kind of tactically. Yeah. And because we work in a place that like, I try to remember actors, because let's face it, 90% of what you're probably going to be dealing with are your cast, are your company members in that regard, kind of. And they are people who are asked to give everything that they've got emotionally on stage and never given the tools to turn that off when they come off stage. And that is something that's really, the day someone said that to me, I was like, oh, and I have not forgotten it. And I think, but Cody said before about just like gathering information, because there are not just, probably not even just two sides to any sort of conflict. There's probably 5 or 6 angles, and they're coming from everywhere. And it's really, really important that you have as much of a 360 view of the entire situation as you can, because information is everything. Yeah. And I like to, in those situations, also share as much information as I can with the person I'm having a conversation with. And to start that conversation, even if you are so spitting mad about it, and you like to enter any of these conversations with respect and an empathy for where they're coming from. I mean, you got to understand why they're upset. Like, make the effort to understand what's going on in their mind, because it's not the same as your mind, and they're not dealing with it the same way that you're or other people are dealing with it, if that makes sense. Yeah, not everybody's brains are wired the same way, and definitely respect that and remember that when you approach a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just goes back to, what folks were saying at the beginning, is that there's a kind of patience and not not an impulsiveness, especially under, it's such a high pressure. I remember when I was in college and I had to stage manage, it gave me like a panic attack, because I was like, when do I go? And it requires a kind of calmness. And I think that in conflict, that's such great advice that all of you gave, is how to just navigate that, from a real sensorial, taking everyone in, relational, all of those skills that you've brought up that make you all fantastic at your job.
Say one more thing, with what Rachel said, just also remembering how it makes you feel when you feel heard and seen, and entering a conflict knowing that people need to feel heard and seen. That's so important. That changes the world, that changes the dynamic. And oftentimes I've been in conflicts where someone will feel heard and seen by me, and the conflict dissipates. Not all the time, but that is it. They just needed to feel heard in that moment. And now they're off to whatever else they need to do. So I think keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to pivot us into a different part of the conversation as we're sort of coming down to our last 15 minutes. This year has been an incredibly revolutionary year, I think, for this field and for the world. And, you know, a big conversation that has come to the forefront is conversations around greater equity and inclusion in our field. And I'm curious, you know, there's a great question that came, that was worded, you know, as stage managers, you're often taught that safety is the #1 priority for both the cast and crew. And as stage managers and leaders, how does advocating for equity, diversity, inclusion, how is that a part of safety as well? And how are you all encouraging and increasing that access in stage management?
I think for me, it has always been a part of the safety. And I think it is having the conversation. And sometimes that conversation can be uncomfortable, but like starting the conversation and starting it early about how important all of this is. And it's like, as you know, these theaters start to take steps, not letting people off the hook. You know what I mean? Like, great, like now you're hiring BIPOC stage, like there needs to be BIPOC folks in leadership. Like, we have to continue to have those conversations, and making one step doesn't mean that it's over.
Totally. And also, I think that, yes, I completely agree that the safety and well-being of the person emotionally is just as important as the physical. But I think that it's important to remember that, you know, we as stage managers set the tone for the room. At least that's what I firmly believe, right? And I think that if we walk into a space and we let everybody in that space know that we are there to provide an atmosphere for them where they can do their job to the fullest extent and not be discriminated against or X, Y, and Z, right? And I think that as stage managers, as humans, we have to uphold that in every room. You know, I tell my students all the time is that I have them make a personal manifesto, you know, so like, this is how you show up in the room, you know, and they always go back to that. So like, if you aren't honoring your morals the way you're showing up, then you need to check that, because if you're not honoring your morals, then you're probably not looking out for this person over there who's too afraid to speak up, you know. So I think that we are in a different time. There's been so many stage managers that I've worked with previously who, when I would talk about certain things, they're like, well, this is not the moment to speak up, or like, no one is going to hear that. And I, excuse my language, I'm always like, F that. Because if I'm in a room, or if someone has brought you into the room, you have the power and the privilege to say something. Maybe not in the middle of the room, but go to someone and say, I saw this is not okay. Or this person over here actually does not feel, you know what I mean? So I think that there's always ways to make someone feel seen and to find, you know, justice, if you will, for whatever things that's happening in the room. But I think that it's important that we empower people to speak up, you know, and I think as stage managers, we can absolutely do that.
I feel so lucky to be working at Hadestown with such an open, diverse company and creative team, and we are holding an EDI, like we're talking about doing courses for the company, and I feel like that's so important for moving forward. And I was going to speak on something else and I can't remember at the moment. Come back to me, I gotta think of it again.
I'll also say it's hard. You know, I'm going back into, like, we're all going back to work, right? And I think that a lot of people are nervous to go back to work for a lot of reasons. A lot of people want to be doing the right thing, but don't know how. A lot of people aren't thinking about doing anything new because in their mind, nothing was wrong. So I think that we're in a very interesting position as people to start asking questions that you might not normally ask. I was talking to Narda, and I think she would be okay with me saying this, the other day, about how when she was going back into rehearsal for the show at the Public, she had to ask questions of the public that she would not have asked before. And the same thing with general managers I'm about to work with. I had to ask questions that I never asked before. And even remembering what those questions are, or like posing them in a way that's going to be helpful, it's hard, and it's not something that any of us signed up to do. But like I said before, I do think it's our responsibility to provide a space that is going to be as open and as successful for everyone as we can, and that involves making sure that we're stepping into something that we agree with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
I think that's what is so unique about the stage management position within the company, is that it sits between the like producerial managerial side and the people who it takes to run the show every day. And I know I'm working on a show right now. I'll be careful that has its work cut out for it. And we've been having a lot of conversations about the work that we have been doing, the work that we need, the learning that we need to do, that we, as Cameron said, that we need to keep pushing every day. And I think we are going to, not only in pushing ourselves and pushing what's happening in the room to create as safe a space as possible, is that I'm feeling like maybe I'm getting very like such a personalized, but like we are going to be in the position where we're going to have to start pushing upwards as well. And like Nardo is asking those questions of the public. Like, I've never had to, like, I know that we are ready to start having difficult conversations with like our general managers and our producers, these associates, these creative teams. Like, that's going to, I really think, fall on us. And I'm nervous, but I'm deeply honored and excited to be in this position at this moment right now, to be able to start being a part of what that change is the change that is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier, you're artists and leaders in the field, and in this moment, this really shows a great deal of leadership that's asked of stage managers in this particular moment. Yeah.
And I think talking in that, also not being afraid of upper management, of producers and general management, and what if I never get hired again, stuff like that, of putting others first. It's such a real fear for all of us. And also keeping yourself safe, of like getting shows that you're like, no, I can't work on this, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got about 5 minutes left on the conversation. I know that there's a ton of questions that are coming in from folks, but one question that just came into the chat, which I think is a great question, is, you all have really exciting careers. And I look up to all of you in this industry. And, a question that just came in is like, what's the hardest thing that you've had to get through to get where you are now?
I'll start. I'll say, for me, honestly, it was believing that I was enough. And I know that sounds cheesy, but believing that when people brought me into rooms, they were bringing me into rooms because I was talented and not just because I was Black. And the minute I got over that is when I found my power.
Yeah.
So I had to get out of my own way and get out of all these things that were ingrained in me, that I had to be this or be that, or do this or do that. And that was a hard journey. It was a very personal journey, obviously, but that was something that I really had to sit with and figure out. So once I, worked through that, the other side was a lot better. But yeah, I think for me, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, yeah, definitely imposter syndrome. I, had a really exciting job opportunity, and like that opportunity was hard, and like the team dynamics were terrible. And I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And a director came to me on the side and was like, you have to keep going. And like literally him saying that to me, I'm like, that's why, because I was done. I was like, this is it. I can't do this. And so for me, I mean, that sticks with me, because as I am like working with younger stage managers and having conversations and building teams of my own, I'm like, that is important, those team dynamics, because you don't know what other people are dealing with outside of work, right? The idea people say is that like we drop our baggage at the door, but like most times it comes in with you. And then like you have to figure out how to navigate that. So definitely like the imposter syndrome in that situation, making me feel like, yeah, maybe this is not it for me.
Yeah.
The imposter syndrome came into my head right away. I'm not sure I've gotten over it yet, but maybe in like 10 years I'll get there. No, I think that something that I think I still sort of struggle with is this like personalizing everything, and I think that there's something about that that's kind of tied in with ego, to be honest, and that feeling of like one, you not taking things personally, which, and it's such a straightforward thing that everybody says, don't take it personally, but that's serious, like, because if you do, in so many manner of things that people say and things that people do, and the things that can come at you, it will ruin you if you absorb all of that and assume that it has anything to do with you, because it doesn't. Like, it really doesn't. And that's something that I still, and when I go back to work, I know is going to be something that I will have to remind myself at least once a day, if not more, depending on how it is. But that's but yeah, once you crack through that, it makes the job a lot easier and definitely more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Definitely imposter syndrome, definitely knowing you're hired because you're good and not because you're a number. And also, one of the hard things is the pauses between gigs. Like, that gets really hard. And I came back from Warhorse on a production contract being like, I'm hot shit. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse. Being like, I'm on a production LARPing contract. I was on this ASM and I went to Tokyo. I didn't work as a stage manager for 2 years. I was on Craigslist. I was on food stamps. I was on government health insurance. And that's okay. Like, that's part of it. And being, it's a hard job, and it was hard to get through. I did music assisting and then went back into stage management, but that is part of the reality for many stage managers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd say, like, many artists, that freelance lifestyle is just hard. I was going to say bird, but hard. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're almost at time, but Cherie, you just talked about, music assisting. Sterner, you were talking about lighting, there's, what are those other jobs, or like those other, if you had to recommend to our students here, like, if whether they're in school or not in school, to go learn about something that has nothing to do with stage management, but you think is important, what would that be?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just going to say that the summer after I graduated high school, I worked at Denny's in Houston, Texas. I was a server, and I learned how to interact with all these little old white ladies and let them talk to them the way they needed to, and they ended up loving me. So I learned a lot of my people skills from working at Denny's and serving all these little women. I'm not saying to do that, but I do think putting yourself in a place of service will serve you, because you're getting to interact with people and learning how to, to think quickly.
Yeah. Dude, I was going to say exactly that. Like, actually, like work in a restaurant, like working in a restaurant right out of high school, working in a restaurant. And it was like, there were some days, I was in the best shape of my life by the end of like that stint. But yeah, exactly what Cody said. You will, it will be unbelievably like what you will learn about the way that you deal with people. I still think that I'm holding on to a lot of those.
I don't have one specific job in mind, but as much as you can learn from everything, every walk of life will help you in stage management somehow.
Yeah.
Just help you be a better, well-rounded person.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I was a customer service rep for Verizon Wireless. I hated that job, and I learned so much because, I was getting cursed out on the daily because, people's phones, stuff happens to people's phones, they get upset. So like that actually allowed me to like learn how to regulate like my energy, my calmness, and like take in, I think oftentimes stage managers are taking in things that like sometimes didn't have anything to do with us. Like, I didn't do it, but you're upset. So like, here we are.
Yeah. I love it. And I agree with you, Cherie, and go out there as artists, go out there and learn about everything outside of art as well, because it's going to inform how you show up in the world. And I think for all of you as leaders, as artists, all of it has shaped it. So thank you. We are at time. There are so many other questions that I want to ask you and so much I want to know more about, but we're at time. So Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the American Theater Wing. Thank you to everyone who is listening. And I hope that you got some great advice on, working on yourself, working on that patience, and leaning into those difficult conversations and that leadership that's really required of stage managers moving forward. So thank you.
And a big thank you to you, David, for moderating. And again, Cody, Cherie, Camera, and Sterner, Rachel, you guys are incredible artists, humans, mediators, motivators. Communication is what I heard, and I heard you are enough and so much more. So thank you for being so generous. Thank you for sharing your insight and wisdom. We are so lucky to have you in our field and your time, and we're excited that we've got a whole group of future leaders out there ready to go and networks. Thank you to all of our panelists, and again, thank you to David, and a big shout out to Cody for helping us frame this and putting it together and think about the connection of those people. Those relationships are key, right? Reach out to those in our community and just continue those connections. It's all about people. So thank you all.